Amol Busari from Wood. A question for Tammy and John. On your program, how big was the team that supported the program? Then a couple of follow-up questions. Did you have champions from the operations team that supported this as well?
Yeah, so the core project team was actually relatively small. So we had represent a lead from our operational excellence team from the OT side of the house. We had our engineering lead. We also have a very big focus on our admissions management. So the lead for that organization was part of the core team. And then my OT cybersecurity guy was also, that was kind of that core team, if you will. But every time we went to a new facility, there were a lot more people involved. We obviously had the Verve team involved, multiple individuals from Verve who were part of that core team. And in a lot of cases, by the time we got kind of through kind of the process, the Verve team was going out there on their own and representing the organization. But when we got to the field, the I&E technician was engaged, the facility manager was engaged, the maintenance manager was engaged, because what we didn't want to have, and we weren't perfect about this, is that we didn't want to have any surprises. Like, we didn't want the team to show up and be like, well, who are you and why are you here and what are you going to do to my world right about now? But it was definitely a combined effort with representation from all of those groups involved.
Thank you. And
You're welcome.
were there infrastructure upgrades involved, control system infrastructure upgrades involved as a part of the program?
Yes, so we did do, in some cases, we didn't have any firewalls, so we obviously had to install firewalls. Some we had to upgrade where there were ones that did exist and expand there and repurpose them. We did not do a complete site infrastructure refresh. We basically focused on the firewall and south of that firewall for the OT systems. We have another project that's actually kicking off this year to focus on the IT infrastructure upgrades that are now required from a network perspective as well.
And that's on the network side. There was no upgrade to the actual DCS systems?
Correct.
Unless that was already in the roadmap,
Yep.
but there was no official upgrade there. That's frankly, as the vulnerabilities gets discovered, that will be part of the roadmap going forward.
Thank you. And general question for the panelists. How much time did it take for you to get this justified financially?
Forever.
Well, I mean, for me, I started in June of 2020, right? And the program kicked off February of 2021. We kicked off with a one-year budget of like $1.2 million. But then that grew to the 6.5 over the course of the subsequent 2 years then. So because we had to demonstrate, we had picked 3 sites as our pilot sites, those NERC sites, demonstrated what it was going to take. Probably fell short on a couple of bits, but ultimately then got the funding for the rest of for year 2 and year 3.
Yeah, from our side, most of our plants are already segregated. So putting the tools in place to allow our engineers to be able to do their jobs on their OT systems is the most difficult and challenging piece that we had. Most of this is already done on the IT side. So when you talk about, your email, everything else, files, on a regular daily basis that everybody's utilizing, at the core of our business, we're a refining company and a lubricants company. And securing our critical assets is the number one and top priority to keep the lights on. I think there was basically an identification of a gap that wasn't there and the need to close it. A lot of our expansion into our monitoring and our threat detection and our OT environments, we had buy-in up front. The big concern is what does this look like? What does the roadmap look like? And laying that out is oftentimes very difficult because at every site that looks different. Starting at the top from a foundation standpoint of getting the software and the tools in place is the first piece, but obviously laying in the infrastructure afterwards, it gets a little bit more difficult. But we had buy-in. Obviously, we're still in the process of deploying systems at sites. getting to the point where we can centralize monitoring, establish those capabilities, and again, go back to being able to do more with a lot less. As a lean organization, it's a lot easier to buy in when the answer is not just filling seats with bodies and hiring more staff.
I have a question about third-party supplied or third-party managed pieces of gear. How did you both manage the cybersecurity of either stuff that's supplied by third-party suppliers or even maintained by them? Is there anything you can share about that?
I can describe how we've done it in other places, if that's helpful. So we often find that, and if you're really interested in this, I'm sure Leah Maddox-Lee tomorrow in our session will talk a little bit about this. But we often find that in facilities, the OEM, let's say Emerson or Honeywell or whoever is managing those systems. And so typically what we'll end up doing is working with that controls engineer, if there is one at the facility, and essentially working through them, I'll refer to it, right? So essentially training that individual who's the site person on the implementation of the software and whatever the stack is, and then working together with them to do that process. And so while we find that it's okay for the vendor to manage it, there's a big, strong desire from CISOs and others to have visibility into what that management is happening and making sure that it happens. And one of the challenges when you've got 8 different vendors is, all right, well, I got to get visibility across the vendors. And so one of the reasons why folks choose us or maybe Clarity or whoever is to give that vendor agnostic view to what's actually happening on the front line. That's what we've seen in others. I don't know if you guys want to.
Yeah, Zane, I kind of skipped over you, and no disrespect intended. So did you have anything, just before we get to the questioner back here, anything general in support of the
Yeah,
Sinclair?
let me address the question there, and then we can kind of circle back. So I would say if you don't ASK, you don't GET. Kind of to your point, John, about engage the vendors and have a conversation, and there may be some pushback. But remember, you can also push back a bit as well and have a conversation. And at the end of the day, the vendor agnostic approach is going to be most beneficial. Empower and enable people to be able to work with the technologies and to be successful with them. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more later. Remove the fear out of it. So make sure that they're going to be successful with what's going in place without fear of repercussions. And by that, I mean, when you add this additional visibility in, you're going to have some people who are reluctant because all of a sudden there's transparency in the work that they're doing. Try to remove that. And I don't know if that's kind of getting into the space of where you're.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and it, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if I turn the clock back a little bit, the answer was, we tell the vendor, we'll see you next week. We schedule them, we have them come out to site. COVID was a big wake up for everybody, I think, in the industry of, that mobility went away. Remote access was a key critical piece of enabling our plants to remain operational. And remote access is tough. Typically as OT cybersecurity personnel, we don't want that. That's a door that's welded shut, and we've kept it that way for a reason. You have to revisit those things, especially in times, like COVID. What's the next instance going to be? So through, secure measures, mitigating risk, multi-factor authentication, and policy, we enabled remote access to enable us to work with a lot of our vendors remotely and kind of keep the wheels moving. It's difficult to navigate, it's troublesome, but it allows us the ability to control that atmosphere. We open the door, we close the door behind us, and we control that access. So that's really how we navigated it through COVID. And coming out of COVID now, we've continued to see benefits with a lot of our vendors in remote access, through remote views, even from our OT systems engineers to be able to remote view to that, and then WebEx with the vendors provides that insight to those systems.
You have another question back here?
Just a quick one. One of the things that you'd mentioned in justification of the systems and stuff was that you had KPIs. So I'm assuming there are some cybersecurity KPIs that you've implemented. I'd be really curious about that. I know in the OT space, we've got some things that we've talked about. When we talk to IT, they're looking at it from a different perspective of what the cybersecurity KPIs are. So I just wondered, what kind of KPIs are you guys tracking and how are you finding them useful?
So that's a hot topic with us. Right now, I mean, on the IT side, KPIs are much more measurable. On the OT cybersecurity side, they're not. With the partnership that we developed with Clarity, a lot of these tools allow us to do an assessment and assign a level of risk and prioritize that risk. And through our systems now and through Clarity, CTD, and other applications, we can then assign and prioritize and risk rank critical patches, identify firmware, and risk rank those by criticality. Those KPIs are easy measurables for us. So the number of high risk, medium, and low priority risks, that allows us to know where we stand and what those percentages are, and give a general overall view from a risk standpoint that we're assuming at each one of our sites.
Yeah, and we're going to mature that over time now, right? Because we started with, the board saying, well, do you have backups of those systems, right? And I was like, no. So the fact that we will now have them is a step in the right direction, obviously. So over time, we'll evolve those KPIs for things like, vulnerability management, how many are present in the organization, what does the patch level look like, where is the risk threshold on some of those. So we'll look to mature that over the course of once we get everything commissioned and stood up, that'll be the next phase of where we head with some of the dashboard work with Verve and their console.
Other questions? One over here?
I
Any?
have a question. I would also add the PLC third-party package question, something that HF Sinclair has, the layer 2 transparent firewall, or at least moving towards having with those in the DCS, so that every PLC has that in between the DCS. My question would be for, you mentioned the 6 keys to success on your implementation. I guess I'm curious, what were some of the not so successful aspects of it? What were a couple of the big roadblocks that you have hit over the last couple of years?
So the two that jump immediately to my mind is when we didn't do a really good job preparing the site for our arrival. And providing the right background with regards to what we were going to do and why we were there. So we had done like a big kickoff meeting. We had all of the sites invited to that and said, this is our program, this is what we're doing, and we're gonna come see you at some point, right? And then the some point was when they showed up at the doorstep and they were like, I don't remember what presentation you're talking about. So I think we've taken a lot of lessons from that to make sure as we're headed to a site, there's a lot more preparation. And one of the other things that was extremely simple, but it made a world of difference, is our PM, who was kind of, obviously organizing all of the activities to avoid surprises. We just put a calendar invite on everybody's calendar who would have been potentially touched by this, not blocking the time on their calendar, but literally said, this is what's going to be happening at your site this day. Here's the key contacts for all of the people. who are going to be there if you need somebody. So that just, I guess, made that information very readily available. So even for me, if I wasn't completely sure about, well, where were we with this week, I could look at my calendar. Okay, there's a team at Alexandria, there's a team at Fairfax, and there's a team at Haverhill this week, right? So I had a very good line of sight so that there were no surprises. So that was very simple, but it took us a while to do that as well. And now we'll be working on the training as well. So that's something that we want to make sure that we get in front of them, because otherwise there's going to be all this great stuff out there and nobody's going to know how to use it. And again, we will not keep it real or make it sustainable at that point.
You said PM, was the program managed by you or by Verve?
Both, but we have an internal PM, and we had a PM from Verve as well.
Hi, I have a question. There's been a lot of discussion about sort of control system vendor lock-in and that sort of thing. And I was wondering if, as a result of these projects, if your organizations are going to be changing how you buy control systems and control system upgrades in the future. Do you see any changes in your RFPs or anything related to that?
Well, I just walked out of the MSSP conversation as well just a minute ago. The tough thing about that is much like ExxonMobil, we're a predominantly Honeywell shop. And being a small mid-continent refiner, it's more so of I think the challenge is everybody uniting on that front to challenge these integrators, these providers to allow the software to work for us. We struggle with some of the same things from endpoint protection. We're stuck in a gap of we're only allowed to utilize what the vendor allows. So we have some of the same struggles. We've also challenged ourselves internally within an organization to look at different systems, different solutions. It's been a challenge. I think it'll always be a challenge. The difficulty is most of these plants have been, whether they're Honeywell or Foxborough or Siemens, they've been that way for tens of years. The amount of investment to move away from that introduces a different level of risk that the company may or may not be willing to accept. And there's comfort in what we know. So we tend to stick with the vendors because we're comfortable with them. Ease of integration to those systems is easy. I think as an industry as a whole, it's up to us to kind of drive that change and ask for that. It's difficult.
And I don't actually know when the last time was that we bought a new control system. So I'm given the partnership that we've now developed within the organization, I'm fairly confident that when there is a new requirement to go out to bid, that the cyber components would definitely be considered as part of that, given the fact that we have representation that's been involved throughout the program. The other thing that I just wanted to offer, I thought of one more thing for you, is one of the things that we've struggled with through the program is, you think you know everything headed in, right? And then you get there, and that is really not the case, right? So having a project team that is very agile and flexible to kind of switch gears on a dime is extremely important because it's not going to be cookie cutter. There will be things plugged in that you're like, what is that doing there or why? And being able to really assess that and be willing to make changes that were not necessarily planned for is extremely important because, we've looked at it as we've got one chance to be here to make an impression. So you also will get hit with, oh, well, can you do this while you're here? And can you do this? And it's like, well, time out. Let's, regroup. But definitely being that the agility and the flexibility is very important. So.
Yeah, the life cycle of control systems is a long-standing problem. It'll be with us for a long time, maybe forever. But I think we have to remind ourselves from time to time that operations people see the control system as an extension of the plant. Mm-hmm. And they build the plants to last, depending on the type of business and the type of process, 10, 20, 30, longer. How old is the average refinery, you know? And so they think of it as an extension of the plant equipment, so they have a different sense of life cycle. Early in my career, I went to my mentor one time, extremely frustrated, and told him why I was frustrated in trying to put what today we'd call IT equipment or computers into plants. And he said, "You shouldn't be surprised that you're frustrated." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You're working in an industry that builds assets to last 30 years, and you're implementing technology that has a half-life of 18 months. So that's a recipe for stress. Get used to it." So, yeah, there was another question somewhere? Yes, back in the room.
Hi, thanks for the content today. Question is, earlier today I heard about assurances made to the C-suite. Can you share what assurances you made prior to the investment in the tools, and then what assurances you communicated after the deployment?
So I can take a first pass at that. So one of the things that we have done, and I didn't go over this in my intro, but kind of during this process, Covanta was actually sold to private equity. And we've gone through a significant amount of leadership change as well. So that's kind of muddied some of our waters going through this whole process. But one of the things as a result of being purchased by private equity, they did a cybersecurity assessment early on in their ownership of us as a company. So we got our score based upon where we were at that point in time. We talked about the fact that we were doing this program. So we're actually scheduled to do a repeat assessment up in a couple of months, so it's timely because it'll be after Secure Ops is actually done. But the commitment and my goals for this year is that we'll see a significant improvement of the score that we did receive. So we've given them some assurance around that. And then the other thing that we've talked about doing is, you know, one of the comments is like, well, Tammy, we don't know if you really like segmented the network. Like, how do we know, right? So we'll do a penetration test in a couple of months' time here to demonstrate that the segmentation is in place and working. And so we'll give them the report out from that as well. So.
Yeah, on our side, it's difficult, right? Usually we're challenged. The first time we come to the table and we say we need personnel, those requests are usually denied. We're challenged on how to do more with a lot less. When we present solutions, that's our approach with those solutions is how can we gain insight of our environments that maybe even adding personnel won't do for us. Putting systems in place and tools in place that do continuous threat detection and monitoring and identification of assets that have been added onto your network without your knowledge. We can have as many people as we want in seats in the plant and sometimes never know the things that are out in the field. So a lot of these tools speak for themselves. They provide a level of detail that personnel can't give. The reporting capabilities, the measurables that they generate are very clear data that they can see what that level of improvement is, the focus and attention to detail in certain areas provides. And that's really what's helped us drive support to our executive leadership teams.
I have a question based on how Tammy is. You're really, I think, your success is based also on how you make sure people are with you, right, on the journey. So you really are built on people, on relationships. I work for a big company and we have lots of change every time. But how do you manage to keep the people involved when people are changing role or doing other stuff, and when it's after 1 year, when nothing happens in the year, it's all solved, right? Nothing happens. I mean, how do you plan to make sure people stay engaged?
The difficulty is at the end of the day, most of these personnel, they've been at plants. As long as the systems have been there, as long as the units have been there, they're owners, they're engaged. Maintaining that level of engagement and ownership is important to us. providing them the tools that make their jobs easier is a big piece of maintaining that engagement. Oftentimes, they're doing a lot of things really well, and in other areas where we need improvement, it's difficult. It's difficult and challenging to leverage the number of staff you have to make sure all of these gaps are closed. So really, if we install a piece of software, a package, a sensor, a tool it's just another Swiss Army knife that they're putting in their tool belt that allows them to do their jobs a lot better and empower them to utilize the tools to improve their environments, that's really the key to it all. They're still the owners of all of these assets. Allowing them to do their jobs better and more efficiently has been the best way for us to keep them engaged.
So for me, honestly, like one of the things that was very surprising to me as we started on this journey was I had like the head of our admissions management team say, well, Tammy, like we were never allowed to talk to you. And I was like, what? And keeping those lines of communication. So every week right now, I have a half-hour touch point with those leads, the head of operational excellence, the head of engineering, and the head of the admissions management team. And we just get on the phone every Wednesday at lunchtime. What's going on? And the other three have all been at Covanta for almost 30 plus years. They're all going to retire at some point in the very near future, I'm sure, and then I'm going to be left with what I have now, right? But we've talked about that from a succession planning perspective as well. You know, how are we going to sustain this going forward? So when one of them leaves, my expectation is that they'll bring the next person to the table. And because of the breadth of what we've had to do when we're at the facilities, they're not the only ones that are involved when we get to a facility, right? So there's, like I said, there's the local I&E tech, or there's the regional emissions coordinator that is also participating in those events as well. So the breadth, the reach is far, but it's going to be work. It's not going to happen like automatically. It's going to require an investment in time and energy to keep the right people engaged and deal with any attrition and turnover that happens within the organization. I won't say 100%, but I think from where we sit from an attrition perspective right now, there's definitely a lot of that across the organization. So it's not just specific to this space that we're talking about. We have the same issues, whether it's in HR or in, accounts payable or any of the other functional groups as well, because people have just been there a long time.
One thing I would just add to this is, I don't know, I'm speaking out of turn, but one of the parts of our relationship is that Verve is providing what we call OTSM services after the fact, right? So on an ongoing basis. So if you think about ITSM, right, we manage all of our systems. See, we really don't do that, right? It's like, oh, it's a system, and I don't know, somebody managed it. And so what that's providing is essentially stickiness with a group of people who are not going to retire, right? And where we're building a team and developing people. And so often we find that clients try and build a team and they hire 3 people to do OT security. And within a year, one of those people have been promoted, somebody quit, and now they're back to 0 again. And so one of the things we've built over time is the ability to offer them essentially a managed systems management. This isn't an MSSP where we got people looking at threats. This is, all right, how do I make sure vulnerabilities are being managed, patches are being deployed, et cetera. Cyber hygiene, exactly. Firewall rules are still in place, right? When somebody has some new device that connects to the network and we see it, all right, what are we going to do about it? That kind of stuff. Yeah.
Other questions before we adjourn?
Eric, if you don't mind, I just did want to take that opportunity to
Sure.
talk a little bit about what we did with Charles. And so kind of circling back to what we noticed. So Charles, he really had, the team had a vision about what they wanted to execute. And to your point earlier, which was kind of building the relationships and everything there. That was absolutely paramount. And when you said that, I'm inside, I'm cheering like all through your presentation, because there was so much of what you said resonated. As we did a pilot, which helped sell into the executive team. So we proved out what we can do, what the partnership, what the relationship looks like. And it's worth noting the relationship with Belden goes well beyond just the cybersecurity aspect. So with Belden, known for 120 years of cable and wire, and innovators in the industrial networking space, all of that technology then was brought together along with the cybersecurity. So when Charles is talking about this, he's building the relationship. So when we went out to one of the refineries and we had to do the pilot to prove it to the executive staff, he's managing the holistic piece. But we didn't treat the second refinery like the first. We're having a different conversation because, keep me honest, it felt like you were managing a lot of what was happening each step of the way, which was built on the relationship. So it was a upward management expectation to the board, to the executive staff, and honestly, leaning on us, leaning on his account team to make sure that they're going to get what they need. So get your vendors. We have a ton of experience across the whole, I work globally. When you talk about, you said tone at the top, it's actually on my pages here, been talking about that for a year. Years. Tone at the top makes a huge difference. And if you can get that buy-in at the top, then you're going to have much more success. If you're always fighting and battling that, the questions that you're asking really are like spot on, which is how do we get that tone? How do we keep that continuity? And so, yeah, I really appreciate, Charles, what you've done in terms of being able to manage all of the complications that, they do arise. So, and your presentation on all that, I was just inside cheering you the whole way along. So, and then the other thing is that you're right. Having that vendor agnostic approach, Verve does an exceptional job of providing technology. There's good solutions. Lean into them. Find out to make sure that you're getting the right solution. Expect a lot of your vendors, both the engineers, but also the suppliers. So.
And if I could just comment on that, one of the things that was extremely helpful, right? Because we were, the IT group who didn't know anything about OT stuff, when John and his team come to the table, they bring a whole nother level of credibility to, oh, well, yeah, we should use this to do backups. Well, I said that 8 months ago, but nobody listened, right? But now, it's a great idea. Love it. Let's do it, right? So they bring an additional level of credibility when they build those relationships as well. So it's extremely beneficial.
No prophet has an honor in their own country, isn't
That's
that
exactly
the story? Bring in an outside consultant. All right, if there's nothing else, we can adjourn. There is a reception starting at 6 o'clock, from 6 till 9. So I would encourage you to drop by and have a drink of your
Yeah.
favorite beverage, adult beverage, and hopefully you'll be back with us tomorrow. Thanks very much. Thank you, speakers.